What's up, guys, and welcome back to Talking Nutrition. Today's episode 59. I wanted to talk about hard work and what it takes to be successful. And I've been talking about this with a lot of people recently, that a lot of stuff online is kind of like, just go hard, just got to work hard. You just got to be disciplined, fuck motivation. You just got to do it. Like, yeah, you got to work hard, but there's a little bit more to that. So I figured, let's try to get this guest on who we have today with us. Because Nick Shaw, first of all, welcome.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Because you wrote a book on how to be successful. So I figured, let's bring you on. Let's talk about this stuff. Because I feel like, yes, again, like we got to work hard, Yes, we got to create discipline, but there's a little bit more nuance to that, So first of all, let's actually just start with you. Like, who's Nick Shaw? What do you do? How did you get into fitness and stuff?
Yeah. Oh, man, that goes way back. So I'm 35 years old now, which seems kind of crazy to say. I'm officially a master's athlete in like the bodybuilding fitness space, which is really funny because certainly don't feel like a master's athlete. But man, this goes back to when I was like, I don't know, 13 years old. I had a brother who was 4 years older than me, and he was training for sports and whatnot. So he was lifting, and we had like an old rickety weight set in our parents' basement. One of those ones with the really skinny bench and like the really skinny like weight standards that you can barely fit your head in between. So that's just kind of what I knew. I think we got it from like my uncle who probably trained like back in the 80s or something like that. But kind of long story short, I just really like the idea of lifting and working out. And pretty early on, I think when I was like a sophomore in high school, I wasn't like very athletically talented. I was like a short, little white kid, not really like, super fast, super athletic or anything like that. But I ran cross country, and I remember being like almost the worst kid my freshman year on the team. There was like nine of us. The top seven ran on varsity, so I didn't even run varsity. And then, but I was like decent at track, I suppose. But our coach that summer after track ended between my freshman and sophomore year said, hey, like the goals are on 100 miles before practice starts, in the fall. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So like I made a little schedule and I started logging everything and I just did it, right? Because, we were told what to do. So I don't know, like me, if I'm told what to do, I just go and do it. And so I showed up the first day of practice my sophomore year, and I was running with like the top two kids from the year before. Now again, they were maybe just a little out of shape. They ended up, doing a lot better throughout the year, but I had really caught up. And for me, that was like this game changer where I said, holy crap. All I did was just work hard over the summer. I didn't like do anything magical. And I went from being one of the worst to like arguably one of the best in the span of a couple months. And I thought, that is really interesting. So it was like this light bulb moment for me of like, okay, even though I'm not the most athletically gifted or anything like that, if I just apply the work ethic and let time do its thing, I've got a chance to do some cool things, and that's always stuck with me. And that's here we are, literally like 20 years later. I still remember that, like that actual workout. I still remember. It stands out very vividly in my mind. And
Awesome.
that I guess that was like really the awakening of like I love fitness because it's you can't really fake it, I suppose, is how I sort of view it. And that ties into the work ethic. Like, yes, there's obviously a lot more nuance to that, but at the end of the day, man, it really does just require a lot of hard work. And, usually if you see someone in good shape, I don't know about you, but like if I see someone out and, if I'm just out grocery shopping or doing whatever with my wife and kids, and like I see someone that I can tell, like, it's lifts or, bodybuilder, power lift, something like that, I always give them a little nod. I'm like, a little head nod, like respect, because there's just that sort of mutual respect, admiration, right? When you see someone else out there. I don't know, do you get that at all, or do you do that when you're out and about?
Yeah, I feel like, you can kind of tell, like, oh, these people are like into
Totally.
weightlifting, and
Hmm. Hmm.
it's still like pretty rare, I think, too. And this may be funny as well because I'm actually doing the Team Full Rum app. I've been in a group for a little bit.
Oh,
I swear,
sweet.
like last week, this is 2 weeks ago. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, what do you do? What's your program?" And I just like, RP app. And then this dude like behind me, he's like, "What did you say, RP?" Oh, I'm not using the app too, so he's in the group as well. So I was like, "Okay, cool." And then
Dude,
you
that's
like
awesome.
you see some people here and there who are like into like more into weightlifting and stuff. But I will say, like, I don't see that many like at the supermarkets, for
Yeah.
example. You know,
Yeah, no, no, for
still
sure.
still a work in progress.
Yeah, it's not that common, which is why when I do see someone like that, I kind of make
And
sure
when
to
you
like,
notice, yeah,
yeah, make some eye contact and give them like a little head nod or something like that, just so it's like,
yeah,
oh, hey, respect, man, respect. So,
yeah, yeah. Where I used to do CrossFit as well, and it's like when you see someone wearing like the CrossFit. I started a shirt, yeah, but you
yeah,
see them like wearing like the nanos and stuff. You're like, okay,
yeah.
like I know they do CrossFit, you know.
Total. Oh
Yeah, for
yeah. Oh
sure.
yeah. 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 Totally. For sure. Yeah. 100%.
But like it, I mean, speaking of hard work, like that's definitely hard work. That's next level shit. Have you ever trained CrossFit as well, or
Yeah, a little bit. So I guess so. I've recently got back into more like competitive bodybuilding, physique sports, but there
yeah,
was like almost a 10-year gap where I didn't compete. And now a lot of that, like I've always been lifting, of course. Like, don't get me wrong, I never stopped working out or anything. But there was like a couple year period in there where RP started working with a lot more CrossFitters, and so I dabbled a little bit more. And I got to the point where usually I would lift like 4 times a week. I would do 1 day of CrossFit. And my goal was to essentially be in good enough shape that I could run close to like a 6 minute mile. And I could be like, if someone randomly were like, hey, we're doing Murph today, I could at least do it like body weight. Maybe not with the full
yeah,
vest, but like that was my goal. Like any day of the week, if I had to, I could do Murph and it wouldn't just kill me, because the first time I ever did Murph, it almost killed me. Um, yeah, it was a rude awakening, and I thought that I had trained a decent amount for it, but not maybe enough. And I was like, no, no, no. Like it damaged my ego. I was like, no, 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 no. I'm gonna make sure that I'm in like good enough shape. And I think
yeah,
even the second year I did it, I think I had to walk a little bit in that last mile. And
yeah.
again, that's just like another ego hit, and I'm like, okay, f this. I'm not letting that happen again. So yeah, I got to the point where I could do like body weight Murph, and then like I would add stuff to it. And when I got to that point, I was like, okay, I'm probably in pretty decent shape. So I'm definitely familiar with CrossFit. We work with a lot of CrossFitters. And this is like a maybe an interesting story, but I also dabbled in jujitsu a little bit. Like I got my blue belt, and the same with CrossFit, same with jujitsu. I liked doing them. I guess I never really just like fell in love with them, but sort of this reinvigoration or reintroduction of getting back into like competing in bodybuilding has absolutely lit this fire in me that had gone away for a little bit. And I love it. I love lifting. I still wake up and I'm just like, oh, I get to lift today. Or like, oh, like what workout do I have? Or like I pull up my, RP hypertrophy app and I'm like looking at it the night before. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm doing tomorrow. And I just get excited for it. And so like that to me that's a good sign, because it just is like, I'm where I should be, where I need to be.
For sure. Did you? Because obviously you've been into at least sports and fitness and stuff for a long time. Did that take time to kind of like turn into that fire? You know what I mean? Because I mean, you did say like you kind of lost that for a little while. Like, what is like the thing that kind of brought you back to that? Like, what lit that fire again?
Oh yeah, getting back into bodybuilding. Yeah. So Jared and Mike were always they stuck with it, and sort of seeing those guys doing a lot of the YouTube filming and really like creating Team Full Ram was actually sort of that spark that got me back into it, because I was like, oh man, like I was like a little jealous, like a tiny bit of jealous. I was like, oh man, like I kind of missed that a little bit. And I'm like, I had voluntarily gotten out of that because, competing in physique sports is really, really hard, especially when you're trying to run a business and you've got kids and stuff. Like it's very, very hard. But like now my kids are a little bit older, so they're a little bit more self sufficient. RP is at a point where we've got enough people working for RP that like not all the work falls on my shoulders. So I've got people to help with that. So it was like really good timing, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, no, it's just fun to be back into it, and it was cool. Credit to Mike and Jared for kind of leading that charge, and they kind of lit that spark back for me. Maybe like almost 2 years ago or so, I would say.
Cool. I mean, first of all, congrats, because that's like turning pro. Like, I can only imagine that is really fucking hard work. And especially, I feel like because we see a lot on Instagram and stuff. We see the photos, the reels, and all that shit. I don't really feel like people really realize what it takes to get like jacked, like actually, and the trade-offs that comes with that. Like
Hmm.
I'm not super familiar with like the whole process because I know you
Uh-huh.
guys do a lot with like hydration and sodium and stuff too. But like it's hard work. I mean, did you
Yeah.
have that as a goal for a long time already, or was that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'll maybe give like the too long didn't read version TLDR of
Yeah,
like
that's
some
all
of
good.
what goes into that final prep. But if we go way back to when I was like a teenager, I remember seeing in. Do you remember like the Animal Pack ads from like way back in the day? Did you ever see those? You know what I'm talking about by
No,
chance? No. Okay. 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 But they were like these really, really hardcore bodybuilding. Animal Pack is a supplement company. They're still around actually, but they definitely, man, they really nailed their target market and niche because it was like this black and white series of ads. And not only that, but they were ads, but it was like this 16-week sort of journey, and they called it the journey. And they like documented like how hardcore it is to be a bodybuilder. And like I saw that stuff when I was a teenager, and I was like, man, that's like just that's so cool. And I thought, like, man, this guy's a pro bodybuilder. I'm like, man, I'd probably like to be a pro bodybuilder one day. Like, that would really be something. And again, like, I kind of got away from that for a little bit, almost a decade, where I went from like not even competing. But it was always kind of a goal in the back of my mind. And then when I got back into it, I was like, yeah, like that's let's give this a shot. And so I qualified for a national show, and then I was like, I told my wife, I'm like, I gotta give this a shot. Like, I gotta give this a shot. I really got to put my all, put my effort into it. And it goes back to part of my thought process of I stopped doing high intensity cardio. I stopped doing CrossFit. I stopped doing jujitsu. I stopped all that because I was like, if I'm going to give this a serious shot, like that's some of the trade offs involved. Laser focus. I was only training hypertrophy style, only using the RP hypertrophy app, like, for like basically a full year plus, really getting back into this. That's a little bit of the trade offs. But yeah, it was definitely a goal. And then it is a lot of hard work for sure. Once I made the decision, because the show that I ended up turning pro in was my first ever national show, and I was originally going to do one that was a couple weeks later. So I jumped into one a couple weeks earlier. Maybe there's a little bit of luck involved. I'm sure I'm never going to discount that. Like, who knows? But as soon as Jared and I made the decision to do that, Jared was my coach, Jared Feather, RP coach. He was coaching me through it. Man, I really turned up the intensity. And I made a post, like I want to say I did about 125,000 steps, like not peak week, because peak week going into a show you kind of want to ease back a little bit and you want to kind of reduce stress and all that. But the week before that was like the number of steps that I did. So that's like 18,000 steps a day. Food intake was
Jesus.
not very much. Like under 2,000 calories a day. And, I weigh over 200 pounds, and
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
working out 6 days a week, training and doing all those steps and all that. So like that's just a little glimpse into it. Um, yeah, it's not for everyone. And sometimes people ask me like, "Oh, hey, like maybe I'd like to get into it." And I'm like, "Oh boy, okay, you want to get into bodybuilding? Like, all
Maybe
right,
not.
yeah." I'm like, Do you really want to?" It takes a different mindset, I suppose. And
Yeah.
again, like sometimes you just fall in love with it. And I think most people that do compete do fall in love with it, and they just love that whole idea and process. Um, yeah, no, it's tough. And what's really funny is bodybuilding is sort of the epitome of like this lonely sport. And it's the funny, ironic part is because I wasn't originally planning to do this show, so I flew up to New York by myself, and no friends, no family. Jared wasn't there either because I was like, dude, you'll be at that show in a couple weeks. Like, chances are I'll be there. Mike will be there. Like, just go to that one. Like, don't waste your time coming to this. I had one guy from the Team Full Round Forum that was there to help me out a little bit, Tony, and he was awesome. But like, so I win, and then I didn't go on stage till like 10 o'clock at night, so I didn't know until super late. Like families texting me throughout the day, like, "Hey, how's it going? What's up?" And I'm like, I don't know. And so I get done, I get off stage, I got that little like sign or whatever that says, pro card, my medal, and I'm like, huh, I don't have any friends, no family here. It's 10 o'clock at night. I got to be up at like 5 a.m. the next day to catch a flight back home. And I'm like, what do I do? I just went back to my hotel room, showered, and like ate some like literally whatever food I had left in my room. And I was like, huh. Well, gee, that's an interesting way to celebrate because it's kind of been like a goal 20 years in the making, so to speak. But
Yeah,
it's the funny part of it all.
yeah. He's like, well, I guess I'll go to bed.
Too totally, yeah. You're
Well,
like, well, it's a little bit of a letdown, I suppose, but right on. No, it was all good, but yeah, I was like,
yeah,
called Jared, called Mike, called my wife. Yeah, like that was it. Because I was like, well, no one's here to celebrate, so I guess I'll call you, let you know what's going on, and then just try to go to bed.
yeah, yeah, great. I thought you brought up a really cool point because we talked about this before I hit record, but like you obviously do pro bodybuilding. I mostly work with like Gen Pop. A lot of stuff still translates. I like that you mentioned your steps and that you're just lifting. Like, were
Mhm.
you not doing any cardio, just weights and steps?
Yeah. So I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Just recently, the weather's gotten really, really, really warm. But up into my show, because I competed on July 1st. June was weirdly not that hot here in Charlotte, which is a little weird. But yeah, I was just doing lots of steps outside. I would usually go for a little walk in the morning, like walk my dog. Um, I'm always moving throughout the day when I need to get that many steps. Like just in between calls, I just get up and like move around, even if I'm just walking around my house doing something. And then usually based on how many steps that I would have left at night, I would go for like a 30-minute walk. Sometimes it would need to be 45 minutes. Sometimes it would need to be 60 minutes, just in my neighborhood. Now, what's really interesting is I started doing a lot of it with my wife. So we would go for walks together, which I think is a really, really awesome thing. And I would highly recommend, if anyone's married or in a relationship with your significant other, see if you can do that. Again, that's not always practical, right? You got a baby or whatever. Actually, you can go push the baby in a stroller, man. That's even better cardio. And it's probably good for everyone involved. You get some stress out, you can just chat. You're out there. Usually it's nice weather. Like, good, 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 good. Win, 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 win. So that was really great, and all that stuff. But yeah, then I would just lift. Usually I would lift in the morning and just was walking around. And I really never got on the treadmill, interestingly enough, because that's just so boring at times. And you totally can do that. And like some people love to flick on a TV show or something like that. But for me, it was just like, I'm just going to go walk outside. And, usually I'm walking the dog or, walking with my wife or whatever. So like I can just accomplish a little bit more rather than just, walking away on the treadmill, not really getting anything done.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't stand it either. I do feel like one day I want to get one of those like the office little treadmills, for like a busy day. But when I can, I'll try to go outside. It's so much better. But so during that whole process, you were not doing any cardio then, like running, like those kind of things.
No, yep, no, I had given all that up.
Yeah, yeah.
I had tried doing a fairly hard cut like the year before. I wasn't competing or anything like that, but just to try to get like pretty lean. And I was trying to do some
Mhm.
cardio. And man, like towards the very end, when your calories get low and you're like trying to run and do high intensity stuff, it just sapped my energy to like train legs and so it's all about trade-offs, right? And so for me, I just had to make those trade-offs of I'm trying to do everything I can to do well in bodybuilding slash physique sports, so I'm okay making that
Mhm.
trade-off. Eventually when I kind of get done competing or whatever, or don't want to take it as serious, I'll probably dabble a little bit more into like some endurance sports or something, but like for now, yeah, I'm like I'm okay giving that up for now.
Yeah, fair enough. Last thing about your fitness, and I would like to switch to the book, but what I also think is interesting is to hear about your nutrition. Like, we don't have to get into like specifics, but like how many weeks is it after your show now, and where are you currently at? Are you kind of moving away? Because I feel like people think you hit the show and then next day is like no limits, like there's no rules, just eat whatever. But it's probably not like that.
Well, so it has been like that before. I've competed a few times. It's one of those things I think when you're younger, you just like you can't wait for it to be over and you're like, "Ah, I can't wait to eat junk food." And I did that before and you just feel miserable. And you can just blow up really, really fast. I don't recommend that. Like for example, when I got done with the show and I won my pro card, I went back to my hotel room and I mostly had clean food in there and I was like eating rice cakes with some casein pudding and I think I had some like fruit and some Gatorade because at that point, like you don't drink a whole lot that day, so you're just really thirsty. So it's like just drinking Gatorade is like a treat in itself. So like nothing crazy. And yeah, I'm about 3 weeks after now. I've just started to kind of get back into because I knew we actually had a photo shoot scheduled, and this is because I was originally supposed to compete at the same show that Mike was doing. So I kind of had a good reason to not go super super crazy to stay like in decent shape for a couple weeks, which is really hard too because like once you hit that like that goal, yeah, it's like really tough to. I'm, it's very easy to talk yourself into all of these different treats and all that. And then I definitely went out to eat with my wife a number of times and like wasn't super like strict with anything. And obviously that's just fun. You get to relax a little bit. But even with that, like just with water, salt, carbs, I mean, I'm up like 15 pounds, which is like probably pretty normal for after a bodybuilding competition, something like that. Because like you reintroduce carbs, and you can just and then you start eating more salt and more carbs or whatever. Afterwards, you just kind of just it all gets sucked up, so to speak, and that's fun. It makes for really fun training and whatnot in the week or two after. So it's always fun to get back into the gym. But yeah, like I would encourage people not to go too crazy, and that has lots of applications into general population folks. When you end a
Oh
diet,
yeah.
don't just go crazy with the cheat foods and the junk foods. Like chances are, if you just eat more normal foods of what you're eating, one, you're going to be pretty happy because you get to eat more, and you won't sort of blow back up as quick. You won't have that rebound effect, and hopefully it'll mean you don't have those cravings. Because I will say that I was good for like a week, and then my wife and I went out to eat, and we went to like an Asian place, and then we got some crumble cookies afterwards, and that was tough because I feel like once you introduce some of that stuff, it is so like the floodgates almost want to just open. And it is very hard to stay on track because now you've tasted that really good stuff. And it's almost like, oh man, like I want more of that. This other stuff is a little boring, a little bland. So that part was really tough. Had I not done that and would have just waited a little bit longer, probably would have been a little bit easier. So that's the part where I would encourage folks to just be real careful about how fast you just start eating all that stuff when you end a diet phase because it can get out of hand pretty quick.
Oh yeah. It's like the riskiest like time for your food, and
Yes.
still I remind people like even if we're just halfway into the cut, I'm like, once we get back to once you hit that end point, you're not done yet. Like we're not just gonna
Hmm.
stop tracking and just it's still a bit of a process to get back, and it's so important because I still feel like that's that riskiest time for people, and that's exactly where it goes wrong usually, for a lot of people at least.
Have you noticed that when people end a diet, they actually struggle more with that kind of maintenance period more so than the diet itself?
Oh yeah, and it's funny because like last episode we did I actually talked about that, and I have a bunch of people now going back. It's kind of hard, like
Hmm.
it's or at least even though it's so important, people kind of think like, oh, I'm not really working towards my goal, or it's like boring, like it's
Hmm.
so important, but it's also like probably even the hardest to kind of like stick to long term, especially if it's like 2-3 months or something, or longer even.
Totally. I don't know what the best analogy is, but it's like you're so dead set, laser focused on a goal, and then you hit that goal or that like date ends, and then it's almost like you're standing in a grocery store the next day, and just like everything is a possibility now. And that can be a really dangerous place because you're like, oh, well, I could have that and I could have that. No, oh, I could have everything. So it is a really tough mental thing to get over. And it's almost like, yeah, you have that end date, but just add back in like a little bit, or even if you add in a good amount of just clean foods, it's like take like that week or two extra and kind of treat it as just a continuation of what you were doing, and then hopefully that diet fatigue won't hit you as much when you do start to introduce some of those fun foods, because ultimately I think people want to get to a place where they can have some of those fun foods, go out with friends and family, on a Friday night or whatever weekend, celebrate kid's birthday or whatever. And like totally I think everyone should try to get to that point, but man, you just got to be real careful if you do it too close to when you end a diet, because it's just slippery slope.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on reverse dieting, and we talk about it a lot. And some people say it's the best way to do it, and I really do like it. Other people say you don't need it at all. You just jump back to maintenance. I just think it is at least nice to have like a transition, instead of being like, okay, we're done, let's go back, the very next day. It's just risky, so it's I like that transition. It's so much more effective.
Yeah, I think some people it works really well for. Some people that I think there's pros and cons. Like I'm with you 100%. I think that makes a lot of sense, or you just kind of just ease back into a little bit. I think some folks, I think maybe it's the case if you push the diet a little bit too hard. The idea of sort of continuing on without getting right back to maintenance is almost like, oh, I can't do this because it's just like adding 2 weeks to my diet or whatever, and you're already kind of burnt out a little bit. But I think if, especially for general population folks, if you can go in with a mindset of like, oh, well, maybe you just end like a week or two early so you don't get to that point, it's easier to do that gradual transition because sometimes, you know, you try doing that and people are like, no, I, I need some more. And then you're like, well, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if there's like a right or wrong answer there a little bit, as you know, like in nutrition coaching and working with people, like, you just got to be able to modify the plan a little bit to what the person needs. And some people might like that gradual
Yeah.
transition because the weight spike probably won't come up as fast either. And then some people are like, no, like just get me to where I need to be. For the love of God, I just need to be
You give
done.
me food.
And
Yeah.
you're, yeah, exactly. Okay, cool, like, that works.
For sure. So we just talked about like hard work and kind of like what it takes in your own fitness. But I really like, just from kind of like a business standpoint, like, I really like how much that translates into that. But pretty much like anything else, like
Right.
success in life, you know what I mean? So let's actually tie this into your book. So first of all, why did you write the book? Like, what inspired you to write Fit for Success?
Yeah, so we go back in time a little over 3 years ago. So my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer in January of 2020, like right before my son's eighth birthday. So he's like 11 and a half now. And that was a real wake up call. My wife is a super healthy individual, well, arguably more healthy than myself. Um, so it was just a huge shock. And then, of course, not too long after that, like, so she had surgery. She started chemo in very early of March 2020, and of course, like, not long after that, COVID pandemic hit. Our kids were being homeschooled. It was this really, we could have very easily fallen into like a very negative space. Like, it would have been a very easy downward spiral with everything going on. And like, I had spent the last couple of years just like reading a bunch of books and just, I just a little bit of a nerd and, loved it. And whether it was like a fitness book or business or psychology or personal finances, economics, I just started to notice a lot of, I guess, commonalities of like what made people successful. And at first I was just like, oh, that's really interesting. Now I'll just make some notes in my phone. And then over time I started to like get this list of like, I think it started out as about 10 different things. And I was like, wow, like I keep seeing these same topics or trends and it doesn't matter the topic, right? Like different, completely different genres. And I just thought, wow, that's really fascinating. And I was like, well, this person was successful in fitness because they did X, Y, and Z. But oh my gosh, like this person in like personal finance essentially said these same exact things, obviously in different words. And so I started tying it all together. And then, COVID hit and we had everything going on around us. And I was like, wow, this is really like the ultimate test of all these things that I've learned. Like, can I apply them to myself and our own family? Because holy shit, like we need this right now. Because it's one thing to sort of talk about all this stuff and think about it, but then like when you really have to put it into practice in your own life, like with some pretty serious consequences. Which, by the way, my wife is 99% back to normal. Like, she's been free and clear for almost 3 years now. Um, I sometimes forget to mention that, and people are always like, how's your wife? So just want to
Mm.
mention that. And so again, just having to put it into practice, I was like, wow, I think this is going to be something that would be really helpful and applicable to people that are going through this, like literally crazy worldwide catastrophe that is impacting every single person on the planet. So I was like, I think this is a really good time because we were locked down because this was very early on. My wife was going through chemo. Like, man, we were taking all that stuff seriously. we weren't really leaving the house much. Groceries can get delivered, whatever. So I was like, man, I've got several months ahead of me here. I wonder if I can turn this into a book. So I kind of, had the rough draft and everything going. And I was like, I really want to get this out before the end of the year, before 2020 ends, just because it was a shit show. Let's just call 2020 a shit show. Right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
that's what it was, right? Yeah, like no, I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. And so that was really the motivation behind it, and because I was using all these things myself, and I thought, I think a lot of other people are struggling right now too. So if they can come out and help other people, like let's turn a bad time into a good time, and let's get some good to come out of this.
Awesome. So what are those trends that you saw in those books, those different habits?
Yeah, so there's seven of them. Kind of distilled everything down into seven. One is work ethic. We've already talked about that. So you can't be successful without putting in the hard work. There's like no way around it. It's the whole thing of you have ideas, but you never do anything with them. Well, like you're just never going to become successful if all you have is ideas. You actually have to put things into work, into practice. You actually have to do something to create an outcome. And that kind of forms the foundation of the pyramid. You can't get around that. You have to do that. Number two, and man, the more and more I think about it, you could have easily convinced me that this is the most important one. Like, I get it. You have to work hard, because the work ethic is the shortest chapter in the entire book. Because, like, how much can you really say about work ethic? People kind of know you need
Yeah.
to work hard. But number two is internal locus of control, which is just here I am, 3+ years later, and I see tons of posts online, and maybe I'm just biased because like the people I follow and whatnot, but it's just like this universal phenomenon where people are always talking about things you can control and things you can't. And I actually have a very relevant story because my son is this week at he's 11 and a half, for the first time ever. Again, he's went to my parents' house and stayed before and whatnot, so like he's been away from home before, but he's at a Boy Scout camp and he's like kind of on his own, so to speak. And he was having a really hard time with it, to the point where he like called home like crying the first night. And I was like, oh man, like, and normally, my wife would say I'm a little too like hard on my kids, and she thought I was going to be like, just deal with it, But I got on the phone with him and I'm like, hey man, I'm like, what day is it? He's like, Sunday. I'm going to be here for a full week. And I said, okay, but you can't worry about any other day, right? Because that's way ahead, like that's way in the future. And I said, what's right here, right now in front of you? Tonight. And I was like, you just focus on tonight. And that's all you have to do. And it's like that goes back to the whole idea of internal locus of control. So you can only control what's sort of right here in front of you right now. You can't get too caught up in the past. You can't get too caught up in the future, right? Like you just have to focus on the present. And if I talk to him again, I'm going to be exact. Put one foot in front of the other. What's the very next thing that you can do? Now put your other foot in front of the other. Like that's what you have control over, right? So like no matter what happens to us, we always have control over like how we respond to things. And that's really, I guess, the biggest takeaway from internal locus of control, because you can get really caught up in all sorts of negative thinking, comparing yourself to other people, all this, but it's like you don't have any control over other people. You only have control over yourself. And so if we can remind ourselves of that, and if we can always come back to that, it just creates so much better stuff. So because we're also talking about bodybuilding, I can give a perfect example. So I'm at my show and I'm backstage. Every single person backstage is jacked. They look like freaks, like superheroes. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in a negative space when you're back there, right? Because I think most people, we're always comparing ourselves to other people. And like the easy thought would be like, oh my gosh, like I don't deserve to be here. Why am I here? And of course I had some of those thoughts, but then I just had to like put my headphone in, not both of them, because I needed to be able to hear what people were saying. And I just listened to some music, and I just basically kind of had some like things that I tell myself. I usually say these things every day. But I'm like, I can't worry about other people. I just have to focus on what I can control. And like it was relaxing for me. And I'm like, okay, like I'm good. I'm good. Like, well, they deserve to be here. I probably deserve to be here too. So like that's a good example. And it just helped me. I didn't get like too crazy worried about what other people were doing. I'm just like, it doesn't really matter what other people are doing. It just matters what I can do. So like, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, totally. I feel like that's that one, and hard work, like, because obviously then the hard work is also within your control. I feel like we forget that sometimes all of a sudden. It's
Yeah.
like we have shit that goes on, at work or with friends or stuff other people do, or you know, social media. There's all this stuff, or even sometimes in check-ins, it's like, oh yeah, but week was
Mhm.
okay, but I went here, and then the food, and there's always like these kind of factors like outside of your control. Sometimes I tell people too, like, no, let's actually talk about like the stuff that you did,
Yeah,
and are you showing up? You know what I mean? Um,
totally.
because I feel like we're very, yeah, go
Oh no, 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 you go ahead. Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts. Please continue.
very good. Because I feel like these days people are very quick to kind of like start blaming shit,
Hmm.
um, almost to a point where it's kind of like kind of going back into the hard work too. It's like, you know everything needs to be easy. This needs to be convenient, and like there's all these other factors that make too much of an impact for
Hmm.
us to actually be able to do something about it.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the blaming other people because one of the books that really kind of was like, oh, this is really eye opener was Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership, and he's like, everything's your fault, and like that's actually a good thing because when it is your fault, you have power to change it. Like you can do something about it, and so that was a really big one for me. I was like, oh wow, this is a really interesting concept. Okay, everything is my fault, whether it's good or bad. Okay, if it is bad, that's good because then I can do things to change it, which is awesome because like the first three principles all really kind of tie together. So real quick, I'll mention number three, positive mindset, and I think of that as like you're optimistic people. But here's the interesting thing about optimism: you just kind of generally think that things will get better. But what's really interesting, there's a book called Learned Hopefulness, and the idea of hope ties back into, so if we work at the pyramid level, right? So you got work ethic, internal locus of control, positive mindset. So these, I think, all really tie together. So you can be hopeful because you know that your thoughts, your actions, something that you can do, they matter, right? And that ties into internal locus of control because you have control over that. And if you feel that you have like the agency or the ownership over something, you are more likely to put in the work to get a specific outcome or to improve your situation, whatever it is. And so it's like, man, when I started to kind of put these things together as to how it worked, I was like, holy shit, like this is really kind of the quote unquote secret sauce. And now again, it's very hard when you talk about mindset and all that because like when I give the example of my son, right? Like, he's 11, so no one's going to expect an 11-year-old to kind of grasp these things because like holy crap, like I didn't grasp them until I was in my 30s, right? Like, so it's a little unrealistic to expect an 11-year-old to know this, but like usually if you can just help kind of remind people this, usually it gives them some comfort because they're like, oh, okay, like okay, yeah, things are kind of going bad around me, but like I can still control like what I think about it or how I respond. And it just gives people like that little pause. And then they're like, okay, yes, bad shit's happening, but there's at least something that I can do about it. Even if it's as simple as just like taking a deep breath. Okay, now what? Usually that helps people.
Yeah,
So like those are the first three kind of
yeah,
all tie together. Number four, you actually mentioned it earlier, is all about discipline. And for me, a lot of that is like discipline really comes down to delayed gratification. If you can, make the slightly harder choice now, you're going to have a little bit easier future versus if you make the easy choice now. And man, this is so fresh on my mind. I'm going to say this because it goes back to my son. And listen, my wife was very beaten up over this. Her baby is away and is struggling and is crying. And oh my God, it's hard. It is absolutely hard. But like, she even called like her mom and my mom. She's like, I don't know what to do. Like, am I doing the right thing? And like, you know, what would be my two, well, my mom and my mother-in-law, they both said the same thing. Like, you got to let him stay. He has to stay. And
yeah.
I,
Let them
told my
figure it
wife, I'm
out.
like, exactly. It sucks. It's going to be very hard for you. It's going to be hard for him. But the hard choice now leads to easier things later on in life because if we're there to be his comfort, right? And just like he can always fall back on that, it's like this I can't do it. I can't do hard things. Oh, mommy had to come rescue me, something like that. But like if he can do it, and he can do it because he'd already went on like a 2-day camping trip, like a couple months ago, and that's he was like, oh, this is going to be fun. I really want to do this. But like it's that hard choice now that leads to slightly easier outcomes later on. It's the same idea. You can apply it to parenting, to personal finances, to fitness, obviously, right? Like, of course, you want to go eat the cookies and all that. But if you don't do that, and maybe you eat something better, like, well, the long term outcome, again, if you keep doing this and you're stacking all that together, you're going to have better health outcomes later on. So that's how I view discipline. And you can do things about it. You can make your environment easier so you don't have to exert as much willpower. Like, I'm sure you know all that stuff too. I'm sure you probably talked about it. Like, you can make things a little bit easier on yourself. So that's number four. Number five, you start to get up into like your purpose and meaning. And then again, usually if you have like a greater purpose or you really love what you're doing, it's just going to make things a little bit easier because you're inevitably going to have number six, which is failure. You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. You're going to slip up. I've never met anyone that's perfect before, minus my wife, of course, but I've never met anyone that's perfect. Slightly joking there. Um, and again, like when you have this greater purpose and meaning, when you do hit these stumbling blocks, when you do fail, it's much easier to pick yourself back up and just keep going because you're like, okay, this is just part of it. Like, I'm not going to quit because, I love this so much or whatever. It makes things a lot easier. And, gee whiz, all this stuff that we mentioned here is super hard, right? It's just, man, like, I really want to be successful. But like, there's at the very tip, the very top of the pyramid, you've got this idea of recharge. And so this comes down to probably a few different things. In Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, he refers to it as sharpen the saw, same kind of idea. So to me, that means like, are you doing the things that will lead to better self improvement, self development? Reading books, learning? Are you taking time for yourself? Again, that's very applicable to fitness. You're practicing something like mindfulness, because usually if you can become a little bit more mindful, you can control your emotions better. You won't react as much. You become a little bit more proactive versus reactive. It's like all these things really tie together. And like, again, usually if you're more have better control of your emotions, you're probably going to be a more disciplined person too, because something happens to you, you don't necessarily have to react as emotionally. So like, I just see all this as really stuff that ties together. And it's just something I'm always thinking about. I'm just fascinated by it. Like, I love reading about successful people and seeing like, well, are what they doing, is that really like the rule, or is that a little bit of an outlier thing, or like what's going on here? But like, usually when you read enough about enough different successful people in different areas, you do start to see some cool common trends. And I love that idea of kind of trying to figure it out, and see
Yeah.
what it takes.
Yeah, I like that too. I like as well that you mentioned that book, Extreme Ownership, because I haven't read it yet or read it, but I did read. Did you read Ego is the Enemy by Ryan
Mm-hmm.
Holiday?
Yep.
So I kind of had like a similar moment there where I read that one and I was like, fuck, yeah, it's actually true. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
all my fault anyway, right? Which is, I feel like in fitness, right, tying this back to, our people listening, and we all have like failures and those kind of things, and maybe we're in a state where we're just not happy about it. At the end of the day, like, it is up to you, which is very confronting in a way, but it's also really cool because it literally means that you can do something about that. But I also had a similar moment where I was like, oh fuck yeah. So it is like whatever I'm currently like unhappy about, in quotes, right? Or, that I want to improve, like, where I'm currently at is my fault. And that is
Mm-hmm.
hard to kind of like accept at the beginning. But once you do, I feel like that's gonna allow you to really like move forward.
Oh yeah, and ego is a really interesting one because I think sometimes it's viewed really negatively, and for a lot of times it is, right? Because it is, man, it is a very humbling thing when you realize it. Like, oh, yeah, it is all my fault, good or bad, especially the bad. It is my fault. If you have a big ego, it's really hard to accept that because you're going to want to point the fingers at other people. But when you point those fingers back at yourself, you can become more humble. You can drop that ego a little bit. Man, that helps a lot because you can go ask other people for help. You can seek out, um, mentors, or just ask for help because no one's an expert in everything. So like at work, I don't have all the answers. For the love of God, I don't have all the answers. So that's why we hire other people, to help with marketing or engineering or sales or customer service. And then it's like, let the experts do their thing and, try to learn from them and pick up on all this stuff. And, again, a lot of that comes down to humility and not having a big ego, but man, it's a really big thing. And I just wonder, when we're younger, I don't think I would have had the capability to grasp out some of this stuff like in my early 20s. And I've seen this with other people, especially in the fitness space. Like when you're in your early 20s, like you kind of just think that you know everything. And I remember being like that. And anyone that didn't think the same way that I did, I was like, they're wrong. They're stupid. And then as I get older, I'm just like, gee whiz, people can do other things and want to train for other reasons. And it doesn't necessarily like, so I think that's just a maturity thing that comes with time as you get older. But like if someone were to present, like, let's say my book, but like it was written by someone else and handed it to me when I was like 21, I don't know if I would have got the same things out of it. I might have just read it and been like, yeah, okay, that's cool. But, fast forward 10 years or whatever, when I'm in my early 30s, I'm like, okay. Now I can kind of put this together. That that's a really fascinating part to me because I think, and let me know if this has ever happened to you, but like I could read the same thing, but if I'm in like a different sort of stage of my life or even different mindset, I'm going to get something totally different out of it from like the same book, same principles, same thing, same words.
I feel because I haven't reread a bunch of stuff, but I feel like that too. Where there's definitely a couple books that I want to reread
Yeah.
at some point. Um, but I feel you because I don't think when I read Ego's the Enemy and I had an impact on kind of like just me and kind of like me actually taking action for shit that I wasn't like fully happy about, same kind of thing. I don't think that would have hit like the same way if I was like even a few years before that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
It's
Oh, I
nuts, and especially my 20s. Because when I was laughing when you said like you were kind of like, yeah, like I have my ways, and everyone else just stupid. I had a very similar kind of mindset in many ways. And then yeah, I guess it's maybe also like getting into your 30s and just learning and just fucking up as well. You know what I mean?
yeah, totally.
But
That's
it's fascinating.
it is. It is fascinating because I just remember you can just. I think that a lot of people kind of fall into that dogmatic thinking too, and they fall into like different camps, and then it's like it becomes like a basically attack on people's personal identity. Like if you challenge that, it's like because if someone comes up and they're like, hey, like I do keto and I like intermittent fasting, I'm gonna be like, okay, cool. Like, can you tell me why? Like, well, I just like it because it fits my lifestyle. And I'm like, all right, cool. Like, there's obviously a series of principles, right? And if it fits within the parameters of that, like you control for calories and, obviously if that makes you adhere better, then like that's the biggest thing. And so, but like, 10 years ago, I was probably like, oh, that's stupid. No, 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 you can't do keto. You can't. I'm like, no, no, you got to do this. And it's like you said, it took a few times. And I remember this because I wrote some diets for some like really high level CrossFit athletes. And I was like proud of how much effort I put into them, but they never followed them. Because it's almost like I made things so perfect that like no one could have followed it. Like even the most hardcore person would have been like, okay, come on, this is just too extreme. They would work out 2, 3 times a week, or I'm sorry, 2, 3 times a day. 2, 3 times a week is nothing for them, but like 2, 3 times a day. And so it was like, I had like the shakes in there, like 2 or 3 different workouts. And I'm just like, it took me a couple times of failing and figuring that out is like, well, my God, it's too intense for people. I need to make it more practical to fit in their lifestyle. And if they can adhere to it better, it's okay, even if the trade offs are slightly not perfect. And so when I realized that, like I remember having a conversation with Rich Froning, and he's like, yeah, I want to do fasting. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, are you okay? Like, that's not ideal, especially for someone at your level, because you train so much. And he's like, yeah, but like, just kind of fits my schedule. And, I've got small kids or whatever. And, I really love a big meal before I go train. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, here's what we're going to do. We won't do that, but like, obviously you're going to eat more after your train and you'll eat more at night. I'm like, are you cool with that? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So it's like, it just came down to trade-offs. But like a couple years earlier, I probably would have argued with him more. Like, no, 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 come on, man, like you can't do that. And I would have been like, hey, let's get on the phone. I would have like been trying to convince him. And like he probably wouldn't have
Yeah.
fully bought into it. And then like who knows? Like maybe we never even would have ended up working together. We've been working with him for like 4 or 5 years now. So it is the case where sometimes you just have to mess up and kind of just get smacked in the face a little bit to figure it out and pick, oh, okay, I need to be a little bit more flexible myself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I feel like that's is essential for growth, and we need that slap in the face sometimes because we can keep doing things a certain way, but if it's, for example, like this, right? If people can stick to it, or if things just don't work, like obviously something needs to change then,
Hmm.
which might take some figuring out, and that's okay too. Like that's maybe good to mention too for the listener, because it's not that you listen to a podcast, about hard work and being successful and those kind of things, or read a book and then you just know how to do it. Like, no, you're still gonna fuck up,
Hmm.
like there's still gonna be like ups and downs. I like to tie this into like weight loss all the time too, because it's always like that fluctuation, with literally
Hmm.
everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here's the thing that I think listeners have to remember. So, like, even when you talk about this stuff all the time, or like, heck, I suppose I've literally written a book about it. I still struggle with all this stuff. I still mess up. I still get in my head sometimes way too much. And I get down on myself. And again, like that's kind of why I have these like things that I always say to myself. And usually, if I'm going for a little walk, like I'm kind of going over them in my head, and you do it enough for long enough, like, yeah, then I put myself in a situation where I'm backstage before I'm going to go on stage, where I've like spent months and months and months working towards this one point. And yeah, like had I not maybe practiced some of this stuff, like who knows, maybe I could have gotten more stressed out, or like just not been in the same spot and might not have done as well. But it's like just kind of second nature. And I was like, no, no, just gonna do my thing, just my thing. Like, it's the only thing that really matters. And I think it helped because I just was very relaxed at that point. I'm like, let's just go have some fun. So it does matter, but we all do slip up, even the quote unquote experts or whatever. And it's all a process, and it's okay. You just don't beat yourself up over it too much. And when you do slip up, you're like, all right, well, hopefully did I learn something from it? All right, cool. What can I change next time? And then it's like, hey, just right back on it, right back at it.
Awesome. Cool. So as we're getting up to the hour, we'll also be respectful for your time, because I can imagine that you have a whole lot of stuff to do.
I love talking about
Anything
all
you
this
want to
stuff, man.
share? Yeah. Okay. So in that case, no, no.
Yeah,
Like, do you
in
have
that case,
any?
that's good. Yeah, anything to share? So I love talking about all this stuff. Feel free to reach out on like Instagram or something if you have questions. At nick.shaw.rp. The book Fit for Success. I mean, you can get like a paperback version on Amazon. It's not that expensive, but I want to say on Kindle it's like $1 or two. So it's like you can go get it and check it out. It's also on Audible. The Audible version has some kind of like podcasts, some chit chats that we did when we were recording it. Just some like Q&A stuff. It's kind of cool. And then, man, the thing that I'm most excited about right now, and again, this ties back into like just being back into that bodybuilding mindset, but the RP hypertrophy app. Like I used it for every single workout of my entire prep. I don't have to use my pen and notebook anymore, and I carry that with me. And sometimes I forget it at the gym if I'm training at home versus when I go to the gym. It's just great, man. Everything's on my phone. I don't really have to like think. It's just like everything is laid out, like the weights, the sets, the reps. It's awesome. I love it. Like I said, I'm like looking at it the night before I go lift. It's awesome. I love building my next program. I just did that the other day. I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. Oh okay, yeah, here's what I want to do and all that. Like I lift 6 days a week, so I used one of the presets in there, like basically the modified push pull legs. Yeah, push pull legs. That's the thing I'm most excited about, man. It's just really awesome. I'm loving it. If people, again, if it's more general population folks listening, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But if you kind of want to take your hypertrophy, or you basically just want to look a little bit better, it might be something. But yeah, if you're just getting into lifting, like work with a coach, work with a local trainer, something like that. Learn all the basics, and then like once you've kind of mastered some of the basics, like that's where something that we do might come into play, but not something I would recommend for beginners.
Awesome, dude. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes as well. To the listener, thank you for listening. Make sure to share this episode. I was going to say share this story. Share this episode, in your stories if you enjoyed the episode. And of course, feel free to drop us a rating and or review on Apple or Spotify. And then we will be back next week. Talk to you then.